This song is storytelling through music done to a masterful level. This is my interpretation of the song 2012 by Rush. Rest in peace, Neil Peart. Section 1. Overture. The song begins with the sound of an ARP Odyssey synthesizer, played by Hugh Sin, who would also create the iconic cover art of this album. This synthesizer not only opens the album, but also symbolizes the primordial state of the world, of mankind, of creation. For you see, the opening section of 2112 isn't simply just a fantastic piece of 70s prog rock, but in fact a deep representation of mankind's journey throughout the ages, its rise and its fall until we get to the year where the story takes place. 2112, which some of you may live to see. After this ominous synth intro, we hear mankind taking our first footsteps, learning how to walk and to run. As this song is a tale, or perhaps a warning on the future of mankind, represented by the incredible playing of these three men, Geddy Lee on bass and vocals, Alex Lifeson on guitar, and of course, we have Neil Peart, the genius, on drums. In addition to the incredible symbolism, Overture preludes and gives us small snippets of some of the musical motifs and ideas and sections to come later on in the song. Very genius songwriting here, and I will make note of those when we get to them. After mankind gets its footing, the beautiful playing of Alex's lead represents the first beauty created by mankind, perhaps the first art or expression, lifting us up out of the primordial fog, separating us from the beasts. Immediately after, the band moves into this very galloping feel section, to me representative of man sort of spreading out, and perhaps a foreshadowing of some of the violence and conflict yet to come. Over this galloping scene, we get a haunting voice drenched in reverb over the top. To me, this voice is perhaps a voice of reason, of philosophy, religion, or enlightenment, science. This brings the music back from the wild galloping into a much more major and uplifting guitar riff. Here we shed ourselves of primitive man, and instead, the band brings us to civilization through their music, through this uplifting major key here. The bass is literally lifting up the masses into enlightenment, and you can hear the drums building it all up from the ground up. Very interesting musical symbolism here. And remember these drum fills for the toms later on. They are extremely important and symbolic of the main antagonists of our story, the priests of Syrinx of the Brotherhood of Man. Here they appear ever so briefly, foreshadowing just masterfully done. The band then changes keys as the ground project of civilization emerges. This next section resembling the peak of humanity, the golden age. This peak is interrupted both musically and thematically, right? The normal feel of the 4/4 time signature is ended right in the middle of the second beat, very abruptly, by Alex Lifeson's guitar riff. This feels like such an interruption, as this isn't even like a cymbal crash to ease the transition. It's literally just play the next part. The band wanted it to sound jarring. This is on purpose. This represents the first real crack in the foundation. This interruption of the golden age is nearly identical to the same riff, which begins the chorus to the next section, the Temples of Syrinx, section 2. So here we get introduced to this first indication that something is amiss, even before we arrive at our musical destination. However, this time it feels more bittersweet and a little bit desperate as Alex Lifeson throws out these beautiful chords, which played over top here is very pained and almost desperate sounding solo. Geddy Lee's bass work here is also incredible, really driving the momentum of this section. And to me, this solo sort of represents this growing descent inside, growing ever bigger and more treacherous. This next section sort of returns us back to the more wild galloping section of earlier. With each passing bar, the feeling of tension gets more and more unstable. It's like the tension is building and growing. The main motif here also gets reused differently in the next section. The elder race of man here is being torn apart from the inside, from the growing dissident within. At the climax and intensity, Alex Lifeson plays over top of this a melody from Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. Now I wonder if this piece had an influence on the name of the song, 1812, 2112. Regardless, the 1812 Overture represents civilizational conflicts, right? Napoleon versus Russia. That is how Overture ends with that. The elder race of man is torn apart in some cataclysmic war, and through the cannon fire and explosions, the tom rolls representing the priests of Syrinx stand tall and reign over the ruins of mankind. And then, with a clean guitar, the first vocal line is sung by Geddy Lee in a very gentle and mournful tone. To me, this line either signifies that the carnage of this war left ruins, and the meek, the priests of Syrinx, are the ones who inherited the destruction, who inherited the earth. But I also think that this may be tongue-in-cheek, poking fun at the feigned humility of these priests. After devastating the enemy and assuming control, I tend to view this as the later, as the new priests of Syrinx is now in total control, now frame themselves as virtuous liberators rather than perfidious opportunists, which we may see later on in the story. Section 2, the Temples of Syrinx. We arrive finally with the story now set. Built through the ages and destroyed in a terrible cataclysmic war, the Brotherhood of Man stands tall with their high priests of the Temples of Syrinx leading the way, leading the right way. And right away we find a familiar guitar riff, but it feels different from all the previous ones we have heard. This may look and sound familiar, but something has fundamentally changed. The drum beat is noticeably different. It's less fluid, more stomping and regimented. Here what we get will become the theme, the motif for the priests going forward, which are these huge tom rolls of Neil's massive kit. To me, these tom rolls always sort of bring forth this imagery of hooded figures casting these huge shadows, sitting atop podiums in a gigantic circle around you. It's just really, really excellent musical imagery here, and it is actually used almost every single time the priests are given lyrics. Check it out when you listen to the song yourself. Another motif the priests are given is their representation by Geddy Lee's vocals. The priest's voice are sung in young Geddy's famous high-pitched wail. These are also double-tracked or maybe false double-tracked. Either way, it gives them immense power and makes them tower over the music. The double tracking makes it sound like there's a lot of them. Just absolutely insane the amount of detail and thought that went into this piece of music here. Here now we get the first stanza of real lyrics in the song. Sung in Geddy Lee's booming voice, he berates us with the modus operandi of the priests of Syrinx. You can see that these lyrics here essentially describe a society in which the priests, who effectively form the government and control society at large. Specifically related here is that the priests control the art and expression of society. The words you read and the songs you sing, all of these must be in line with the goals of the priests and the Brotherhood of Man itself. Everything must toe the party line. This seems to be some sort of technocracy where logic and reason reign supreme over emotion and expression. Our great computers fill the hallowed halls. Computers have replaced the church, right? Hallowed halls represents a church, right? The mosque, the temple. The incredibly powerful and driving, relatively straightforward rock feel of this section as well sort of really drives the point home that the priests dominate the society of 2112. This section also reveals that they claim to have made this world specifically with quality in mind. Quality except for the priests themselves, of course. So we have a society in which every facet of life has been methodically curated and crafted to be in service of the Brotherhood of Man, right? To be in service of what the priests believe mankind should be heading, in the collective service of equality, controlled by technocratic elite who dominate over top of everyone. It really sounds kind of familiar to today as well here. Musically, this is the most rocking, straightforward part of the entire song. Firmly sitting in a minor key, these sections really echo a lot of the same chords and rhythms of Overture, but it's all slightly different, suggesting that underneath this new veneer, it is the same society, just with new leaders at the helm. Closing out this section, we get the same guitar line, which was played underneath the line, "And the meek shall inherit the earth" earlier in the song, in section 1. But this time it is played on an acoustic guitar in a much slower and deliberate pace. This sets in motion the rest of the song, in which our meek protagonist, he inherits the earth, he inherits culture, expression, art. But by playing it without the vocals, it also makes you say the words to yourself, to fill in the blanks yourself. Really, really genius songwriting that just gives a fantastic rocking section of music a really, really meek and interesting way to end. Section 3, Discovery. The song resumes with a fade in, and we hear the sound of running water and an out-of-tune guitar. The protagonist has discovered this guitar. Presumably, it was hidden away in a cave or maybe a grotto somewhere far away from the prying eyes and ears of the priests. What follows then is almost 2 minutes of some of the most genius guitar playing I've ever heard. Here, Alex Lifeson managed to make his playing sound like someone learning the guitar in fast forward. Here, our protagonist learns the guitar from tuning to learning the major chords to putting his first chord progressions together. The narrator, the protagonist, finds this guitar and learns how to play it and learns to express himself. And throughout this whole section, it remains firmly in a major key and one that rings out in a very, very hopeful and wondrous feeling. Just incredibly genius playing by Alex Lifeson here. We're then greeted by Geddy Lee speaking out the first words of our protagonist. He sings these lines that come from the protagonist in a vastly, vastly different way from the priest. It couldn't be more different. Here he sings very gently, sweetly, with a sort of naive optimism that really shines through the words that he is singing here. The contrast could not be more apparent and deliberate between the two. Here, Geddy Lee describes how the protagonist has never even seen a guitar before. He doesn't know what it is. What could this wondrous device be? I love the little detail of this line, quote, "It's got wires that vibrate and give music." It's like the protagonist's society is so obsessed with technology and the future that the term strings has just been completely forgotten and replaced. Never mind that it gives music, it doesn't play music. One doesn't play music, it gives music to people. All echoes this sort of machine-like society. The guitar playing becomes more and more confident. The protagonist's guitar skills increasing, as well as his confidence, as well as him discovering how the emotional highs and lows that music can produce within one's soul. With such a grand discovery, he wishes that the people can all see its light, and that everyone can make their own music from his discovery, to bring art and expression back to the people, back to the gray computer machine-like world, to bring his discovery to his priest, to enlighten everyone. And he expects to be rewarded for doing so. So, in the next section, that's what our protagonist does. Section 4, Presentation. The fourth section begins with the rest of the band entering with a thunderous, forceful crash. Distortion comes back in, and here, we find ourselves back at the Temples of Syrinx. The music that the band plays here is meant to sound like an imposing temple, right? An imposing spectacle. We could imagine these hollowed halls of computers and these priests. And did you hear that descending tom fill again? Representing the hooded figures surrounding our protagonist in a judging downward look, him presenting his discovery. As we get to the first lines of the section, we get rid of the powerful distorted guitars and move right back to that same progression that was being played in the previous section with this very clean sound, complete with much less bombacity played on the drums and bass, really signifying how small and insignificant the protagonist is when compared with the priest here. The juxtaposition couldn't be more grand. Here he presents to the priest his ancient miracle, which he has found, and attempts to show them what emotions can come from his music, from his art, claiming that, quote, "I know that it will reach you," end quote, kind of giving that self-evident quality of art. And then boom, crash! We are taken back to the priest, whose sudden burst of dynamics seems to suggest an interruption to the protagonist. They can't have this. Again, we get this imposing sound when compared to the really meek protagonist sound here, right? Very, very different, which is directly contrasted by the priest sections in it being in a minor key as well, compared to the more major sound of the protagonist. The protagonist is both meek, soft, and in a major key, and the priests are dominating, loud in a minor key. Very, very interesting change of dynamics there by the band. Really, really cool. Again, Geddy in his screeching high range personifies the venom of the priests here. The priests, they already are aware of the guitar. They have no need for these foolish, ancient toys, right? Which they claim to have helped destroy the elder race of man before them. Here, it is also implied that the elder race of man are the forebearers, that the Brotherhood of Man are the current inheritors of what once was. The world is doing fine, and these priests have no need for art, music, or self-expression at all. These are dangerous and only lead to destruction. What's worse is that they aren't ignorant of this art. They are actively suppressing it themselves, letting on that the songs that they want to sing are the only songs that are left. The band then switches dynamics yet again, back to our small and meek protagonist. Again, the meek shall inherit the earth, who in disbelief says that the world needs to hear this beauty. It needs this beauty to get away from the soulless machinery of the world. This current society is beautyless, ugly, and shallow without expression. He pleads to the priests, repeating that his last few lines back to them, right? He repeats these again because he just has no other argument, which then leads to another interruption by the priests, who only see our protagonist as some sort of annoyance, a fly to be swatted. They have much more important things to attend to. They point to the average person. What use is music and self-expression to them in their lives. This does not fit with the priest's plan, and thus the silly whim of the protagonist for his art, his guitar, must be forgotten about completely. And to me, this represents the protagonist running away from the priest, where even as he is crying his heart out, he is crushed, right? This is, of course, represented by the painful shredding of Alex Lifeson. You can still hear the priest's theme song playing, indicating their total control and influence on society. It's really, really cool juxtaposition here. The solo is also rather muddy and played through tons of effects and distortion, really highlighting the emotional turmoil and devastation of the protagonist in our section here. Our protagonist then passes out, likely from exhaustion, which is represented by the rather jarring and sudden end to this section here. What a fantastic example of juxtaposition in music representing symbolic storytelling elements here. Section 5, Oracle. We come back to the dreamlike guitar being picked with Geddy's soft singing voice. He spells out that this next section is a dream, a vision, which is represented by this ever-increasing delayed sound that builds and builds until we are brought right into the protagonist's dream or vision. This whole section is referenced in the Overture as well, specifically musically, right? The lifting us up out of the proverbial swamp and golden age sections, which I presented earlier. Here, Geddy Lee's voice takes on the melody which the lead guitar played earlier. Really, really cool change up there, indicating to us that we are being brought back in time, back to the golden age of the elder race of man. This voice is sung in a high register, like the priest, but not in such a sneering and domineering tone. Rather, it's gentle, it's uplifting, it's illuminating, it's healing, right? Here, this oracle guides the protagonist and shows him visions of humanity's past, the works of gifted hands and hungry minds. The beauty of self-expression, which was at last covered up by the priests and is revealed to us, both through the lyrics, but also by the beautiful and sort of bittersweet music being played underneath here. It's really revealing. You go back in time and it's beautiful. Here, the oracle leaves the protagonist with a history that the elder race expanded across the galaxy. Yet, despite their power and how their power is growing, the long return to the planet which they long for. Perhaps this planet is Earth, the homeworld of the protagonist here in our story. They long to return home and to tear the temples down, suggesting that the priest's temples were sort of a backstabbing betrayal and not their plan. The oracle section then also ends rather abruptly. Perhaps the dream was interrupted by the awakening of the protagonist. It sounds unfinished, right? It's ambiguous, it's unending. Part 6, Soliloquy. The 6th section opens up the sound of that same running water from earlier in section 3. Maybe in his panic from the meeting with the priest, the protagonist fled back to the grotto, right? The safe space away from the priests, the place where art was found and rebirth. He awakens while plucking his guitar wonderfully. The protagonist, still in his dreamlike state, laments that he wishes that his dream may come to pass and not fade away like all the others. Yet, as he awakens further and his mind begins to run, he is suddenly struck by a cursed thought. What he thought was a dream, it wasn't a dream at all. It was a vision gifted to him by this magical grotto, or perhaps through the guitar itself, or perhaps the elder race themselves gave us this. It hits him like a freight train as he suddenly realizes what his life is. The distortion guitars kick back in and we are brought back to the overture once again, this time the solo section. Yet it feels much, much more desperate this time. Geddy Lee cries out as the protagonist, whose voice has been changed to be much more like the priest's, very symbolically, subtly indicating that he realizes he is simply one of them all along, his voice matching theirs. In his soliloquy, he realizes that he cannot live in the society in which the vision showed, right? He must live in this current graceless, wonderless, artless, and emotionless society, controlled by the priests, and as such, he spills his lifeblood over the floor of the grotto in which the guitar was found, symbolically killing not only himself, but music and art in the process. Incredible. Part 7, Grand Finale. This last part of the story is very much open to interpretation as how the story ends, so please leave yours down below. All the music here is new and novel, yet similar to what we have heard before. It starts out with this sort of almost triumphant sounding galloping section, which is reminiscent of some of the earlier stuff from before, but not really, which represents to me the return home of the elder race to correct the mistakes, right? It sounds very triumphant, like a cavalry charging. Yet through this battle and struggle with the priests, drumfire and clashes with weaponry, are represented by the chaotic and dynamic performances by the band, cymbal crashes, guitars, and everything like that. And in the midst of the final crescendo of sound, we get this message, which sounds like it was played over top of a loud speaker. Quote, "All planets of the Solar Federation, we have assumed control," end quote. Solar Federation refers to the planets of Sol. Solar, right? The sun, that's our sun. Here the Elder Races return. If it was the Galactic Federation of all the planets, it would say that. Here it seems that the priests of Syrinx have formed some sort of Solar Federation of planets. Here the Elder Races returned and liberated the people from the tyranny of the priests. And perhaps the people will be put under new tyranny. But the message remains hopeful. Yet, despite this hopeful tone of the return of the Elder Race of Man and the titanic clashes going on above, back in the grotto, back where the guitar was found, back when art and expression was rediscovered, lies our protagonist, his blood pooling, flowing over top of the guitar, flowing over top of the rocks of the grotto, pouring into the water of life there. In a very symbolic way, shows that despite what happens above, music and art are such intrinsic parts of human nature that without it, we are nothing and resort to death itself. A musical masterpiece worthy of the highest praise. Bravo, Rush. Thank you for the music.